Matt, what's going on, brother? Good to have you on.
Hey, Larry, thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed learning about Dad Edge and learning about you and your big team of supporters. It's a great cause. I'm honored to be here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Anything. It's funny you're on because we just it's very. I would say things come in waves with the podcast. So like we've past several guests we've had for a couple of weeks now have been financially focused, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit on this show, but we're going to cover some other things too. But before we get started, you want to do some fun questions, just sort of off the cuff,
Yeah,
just okay, just some
let's
warm
rock and
ups.
roll. You bet.
All right. So, favorite movie and why?
Rocky Balboa, which would be Rocky Six, because I really feel like that was a part where he found who he truly was as a fighter and stood up for the things that he's firmly believed in. He lost his wife. He was regrouping. I love the whole series. I don't know if you're familiar with Todd Herman's work on the alter ego effect, but Rocky Balboa is my alter ego. I try to bring him to my projects and my work and my interactions. That basically how you show up on the field. And so thinking of him and the speech that he gives his son in that movie is always something that's motivated me. It meant a lot to me. So I definitely have lots of man movies like Braveheart and stuff that I love, but I would say that Rocky Balboa sticks out the most.
Oh yeah. Now, I haven't asked that on any other podcast. There's a reason I asked you that question. I saw that photo in the background.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was
Given
thinking
that.
Rocky. I didn't know what you were going to say, but I was like, I'm going to ask him what his favorite movie is.
Well, it's interesting. An organization that I'm the board chair for, which is the Greater Des Moines YMCA, gave me that because I helped with a fundraiser and I dressed up like Rocky, and so that was part of the deal there. So they've given me a hard time, and that's been that picture comes up quite frequently in our interactions. So
Give me your best Rocky impersonation. Let's hear it.
I'm actually better at Mr. T than I am Rocky. But
Let's do it.
all right, what's your prediction for the fight? Prediction? Yes, prediction. Pain.
Pain. Yeah. Hey boy. Hey boy.
That's right.
I crucify him. You next.
Yeah, I mean, he's got some classics. That's Rocky Three, and that's also one of my favorites. Mr. T made it. No, but I pity the fool.
Yeah, I joke about it, but Mr. T's real name is Lawrence, which is my real name. So I always joke like, "Oh, he kind of made my name kind of cool," like he was
Yeah,
badass back
definitely.
in the day when he was like Clubber Lang back in the day.
That's
Some of
right.
the millennials are like, "What are they talking about?"
Who
It's like,
is Clubber Lang and who
right,
is
who's
Rocky
Clubber?
for that part? Now it's all Creed, right? It's all moved on to the next generation.
It has. I actually just traveled with my 14-year-old and we drove or we flew to Colorado and then we had a 3 hour drive to Wyoming where we did some trout fishing. So I went and screenshotted 150 questions, get to know you questions, like just to get to know my teenager like all over again, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And one of the questions was, "What's your favorite movie and why?" And one of his favorite movies was Creed. And I was like, "Oh, really? Why?" And he's like, "Oh, because he worked really hard. He was kind of the underdog. He got beat, and then he kind of came back, and that kind of thing." I was like, "That's really cool." I was like, "Man, it's funny. I grew up on the Rocky thing, and you guys are growing up on the Creed thing, so it's kind of
Yeah,
interesting how that happens." But
it is. The themes are congruent. I think
yeah,
the underdog and just the working hard, the work ethic that's needed to do the
yeah,
things that they accomplish. And I know it's fiction is still it's really hard not to be inspired by.
it is. It is. Uh, Favorite sport growing up that you enjoyed playing?
I was a tennis player almost all
Okay.
my life. So started when I was young. We lived all over the Midwest. And every time I moved, that was kind of how I connected with new friends and stuff, was just joining the tennis leagues and getting going that way. And then landed here in Des Moines when I was in high school, and I played in high school and in college, and still try to play a little bit. Getting older, the injuries and stuff are a little bit more, of a pain than they've been in the past. But definitely something that I've enjoyed my whole life.
Maybe there's something with you financial guys and tennis. I don't know. I had Sam Dogan on last week. He's with Financial Samurai. He wrote a book called Buy This, Buy That. And I asked him the same question. He said tennis. I was like, man, so maybe there's this theme of tennis
Yeah,
guys and numbers. I don't know.
Maybe we start with tennis. A lot of us play golf now as
Right.
get into our second part of life. So definitely play more golf now than tennis, but
Yeah.
starting early that. And I think that was the deal back then because you had John McEnroe, Bjorn Borg, these tennis heroes. Everybody else that's grown up now, it's Tiger Woods. So that's shifted that. I think that whole sport dynamic a little bit.
That's very true. One of my oldest boys, like their favorite activity is going up to the high school here and playing tennis. Now, none of us played tennis. None of us played tennis competitively.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go up there, and actually my 14-year-old and I just did this a couple of weeks ago, and you got all these like crazy serious people. You got like even like these 6-year-old like prodigies that are playing like right next to us. And me and my kids were just absolute idiots. Like we're just like we're out there just to get the cardio in and just have some fun, some
Sure.
laughs, and like we don't even serve it right. We do the whole thing. We bounce it once and then hit it, and then
Yeah.
because we can't figure out that overhand serve, but we have a blast doing that. That's
That's
cool,
great.
man.
No, I wish more people played it. I am seeing more courts pop up, and of course, pickleball is getting to be
Yeah,
a little bit more, less intensive way to kind of play the
right.
same vibe and stuff. So it's definitely making a bit of a comeback, just in a different form. I feel like.
Yeah, totally. We just had right down the street from us, we had courts put in, pickleball courts, and I didn't even know what they were. I was like, what is that? Like, oh, it's pickleball. It's like, oh, I was like, oh,
Yeah,
because they're not the same size, but they look a little different. So,
exactly. Yep.
one more question for the listeners, and for the context of this show. What does your family look like and marriage and all that good stuff?
So I've been married to my second wife for 15 years. Name is Lisa. We have four children, none together. I have two. One is 24-year-old daughter that's living in Chicago full time now in a career, and then a son, Matt Jr., that's 25, living in Denver. And so they're both out of school, graduated from the University of Iowa, and are working full time in their careers. And then I have stepkids that are twins, and they're 23, both in graduate school. One just finished and will be getting a career as a CPA here in October. And then my stepdaughter is in Rhode Island at the University of Rhode Island taking a graduate degree in marriage and family counseling. So she's 1 year into that and has about a year left. And then Lisa works with me here in the office. She's my operations manager. And then we have a series of contractors and interns and stuff that work with us as well.
That's cool, man. Knowing what I know of you and your book and just your personality, the story I'm telling myself is that you said your daughter's in Chicago, is that right?
That's right.
And your son is in Denver. Uh, that the story I'm telling myself is that's hard for you.
It is. It is. Yes. You know, I liken it to take when you take them to college, and we could talk about kind of the progression of those preteen and high school years too, and how important that is. But when you take them to college, there's just something that happens emotionally to you that you recognize a part of your life is over, and you can accept that, or you can fight that, or you can just lament it. I chose the latter, especially with my first child, just to lament it that, wow, what do I do now? I'm not a full-time dad. They're not here on Friday nights anymore. All of that. And then as they grow and as they mature and they're beginning to develop their own plans for their lives, if they leave again, that's what it feels like, is that they're leaving again. So you're going through this detachment process of where you're not going to see them every week. So if they're in college, they can get over there quick and take care of them. If they're in Denver, I've got to jump on a plane. I've got to do whatever. And so it definitely is a process, and it's one that's waiting for all of your listeners. And hopefully I can shed some light on ways to get through it without all the angst that it caused me.
Mm. How, just a really quick side question. And then I want to get right back to what you were talking about. How do you know Todd Herman?
I don't know him. I know his work.
Okay.
So the Alter Ego Effect book is one that I've read a couple times, and I've done the audio as well. And he's got a master class
Yeah.
on it. And it really resonated with me. So it's something I come back to. I try to at least every few months, just to rethink how I'm applying that in my life.
Well, I think this will resonate with you since you're a fan of Todd's. I'm friends with Todd. Out of almost nearly 1,000 shows, there's one, you learn, you remember certain guests for certain reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's sometimes a guest will say something and it just hits you in the heart like no other, right? And it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like it gives you chills. Todd came on the podcast twice, and one of the studies that he cited was 80% of our one-on-one time with our kids is gone by the time they're 12. I will
Wow.
never forget that. I think I interviewed him in 2019. We're talking 3 years ago for the first time. And when he shared that statistic, it, like, a part of me like cringed. Like, I was like, oh my God, are you serious? And he's like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, why is that? And he's like, well, you didn't think about it. He's like, once they're like 12, 13, he's like, they're kind of off with their friends. They're doing their activities. Like, you don't really see them nearly as much as you do up until that age. And I'm like, holy freaking crap. Um, so back to what this feels like, because our listeners, I'm starting to get to that edge where I've got 16 through 6, 4 boys right in there.
Okay.
And the 6-year-old you kind of view as like, oh, like I have all this time, right? My 16-year-old, I'm like, I have 3 years. And that's a huge slap in the back of the head. Like, you better have some sense of urgency here, man, right? But for all the listeners that are raising these kids, could be little, 5 to 10, tweens, teenagers, give these men some advice on, maybe it's, had you do these ages over again, what would you do different? Or if you were just giving counsel to your best friend who was raising kids 10 years previous to you, what would you tell us?
I would tell you that even though it's going to feel like some work to engage, it's good work and it's always going to pay off. And so, don't miss anything. Don't miss their games. Don't miss their moments where they do want to talk to you. As they grow, it's hard to get them to engage, especially teenagers. They're just finding themselves, and they're not interested in your life and what you think. And so, but every now and then they show up, and every now and then they come to you with something, and you're going to recognize it as a moment. And so being present for that, and being ready and listening for those moments when they come. I mean, those are the things that I still value so much, taking my daughter for a one-on-one trip in her teenage years to get her away from her friends. And for 2 days, she didn't say anything. On the way home, she opened up about all these beautiful things that she was going through. And so just being ready for those moments when they come is it's good work. And when you don't feel like doing it, go ahead and push yourself to stretch yourself and stretch outside of your comfort zone, stretch outside of maybe what you want to do in that moment, because you'll be grateful that you did.
So Matt, what I appreciate you being very authentic about this. What's coming up for you right now?
So I'm a very emotional parent. I've always been emotional. I think it goes back to when we got divorced and my kids were young. And that actually made me a better father. And so for any of your listeners that are going through a divorce or a split, no matter what your kids' ages are, I tell you, there's a lot of hope on the other side of it, that you can be even a better dad than you were before. And it doesn't seem possible because you don't have as much time, and you've got conflict, and you've got just challenges of messages that your children are going to receive. But I tell you, have faith, because you can and will get through it, and you can be a great dad no matter what's going on with that side of things. And even though if you're right in the midst of it, it seems like it's never going to get better, I promise you it does. And so I think it goes back to that. And so I just really, really held on tight to my kids because of that. And then as they got older, and I mentioned in the book, they started to pull away, and I had a really hard time with that. And so you can see it still makes me emotional to think about, because I still feel that way. I still feel that I want to be with them all the time and be part of their lives in every way that I can. And it's just, they're adults now, and they're teenagers or preteens or whatever. And so it's a lot more gratitude now, Larry, than it is sadness. So even though it shows up as tears or emotion, it really is gratitude for what we've been through and that I have them in my life.
I just want to make sure that men really heard that. Uh, Meaning many of us are out there and we're working long hours, right? Or we're doing things that take us away from our kids, and we get it, right? We all need to work hard. I'm not saying that. You know, I've had so it's so timely you and I are talking about this right now on the podcast because I've had so many men who have reached out and said, "Hey, do you have a podcast on work-life balance?" And I've been saying for years, so I was like, there's really no such thing, man. Like there's no such thing as you're never ever going to achieve balance. There are times your marriage is going to require more attention from you. There are times when your business is going to require more attention of you. There's going to be times where your physical, mental, emotional health is going to require more attention from you. And these other aspects of your life are going to take not a backseat, but it's going to be less attention. However, what I will tell you is less time doesn't mean less quality. Like there are several parents out there, men and women, right? Moms and dads that have hours in the evening with their kids. But do they really make it count? Some do, right? Some don't. Some are just physically there in the same space. And there are other parents, there are other people that really embrace that. And maybe you only have 30 minutes, right? But you make that 30 minutes count. I had one podcast guest on here, David Wygant. This was years and years ago. The movie Hitch with Will Smith was based on David Wygant's life. He was like kind of like the first dating coach out there for men. And basically, if you really look at what David does, is he helps men with confidence, with communication, with being able to, be confident and somewhat bold, with women, right? But I had David on because I wanted to, him to talk about like, hey, how do you bring these skills into your marriage? And David reflected on, and it was a great show. David reflected on though growing up with his dad, and he's like, my dad like had hours with me in the evenings, and he would play basketball with me in his robe and slippers with a glass of scotch, and you could just tell like he really didn't want to be there, but he just was sort of there and just kind of numbed himself with a lot of alcohol and just didn't really want to be there. And I think you can send those messages to your kids in a way that he's like, I would have much rather my dad spent 30 minutes with me in a pair of shorts and tennis shoes without the scotch, even if it was just 30 minutes and not an hour. And he was all in, right? So I think that there's this way, there's definitely ways that we can be all in, even if we have less time, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking though, because you're an emotional person when it comes to parenting, and by the way, so am I. So am I.
Yeah.
And nothing will pull on my heartstrings more than time with my kids, something my kids will say, a moment we've had, some way, shape, or form. For you though, I'm just going to make an assumption that I'm thinking you did a pretty darn good job of making these intentional times with your kids really count. And I want to know, how did you do that?
For me, it was a little more structured because of the way that we shared
Right.
our time with them. So I absolutely knew when those times were going to be and how to get ready for them. So I think a lot of dads, we get stuck in activity mode. Like we always want to be doing something. And I way overdid it, especially when they were younger, of just trying to fill the time with all these activities instead of just watching Ice Age or playing Clue or, my daughter's a great little artist. So doing some sort of art craft thing, just chilling out instead of always, we've got to go to the circus and then we're going to go to the Harlem Globetrotters because you're going to love that. Then we're going to go to, the amusement park. And then so a lot of times you're staying busy, but you're not connecting. So finding balance there is something that I had to learn. And every now and then just say, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to stay here at the house, or we're just going to go hang out on the trampoline and talk, or we're going to make dinner together, or whatever it might have been. So as men, we like to do, in many cases, we like to be active. We like to be fixing problems. And sometimes that's not what's best for the crew. It's just a quiet moment of doing nothing.
That is so true. Again, so timely. This summer, my kids are, they're 6, 8, 14, 16. So I was telling my wife, I was like, this is by far the most expensive summer we've ever had. And it's because I felt on days that we were with the kids, which was pretty much all the time, we always felt so compelled to go do something, right? And here we are, the end of summer as we're recording this, and just yesterday, my 6-year-old and 8-year-old were like, "What are we gonna do today?" I was like, "What if we stayed in and we just colored?" And they were like, "Yeah, that sounds good." So we went to Hobby Lobby, which is this place where you can get like arts and crafts and stuff like that. And we got this kind of like mural type looking thing with these markers, and it was like this dragon and stuff like that. And it just like you could just color like these white spaces in it, and it turned out really cool. And I was like, "What do you guys say we get this and we just go home and color?" And they're like, "Yeah, that sounds awesome." And what I will tell you is that thing was $7.99. We brought it back home, cut up some sub sandwiches, and we sat there and we played music and we colored for 45 minutes.
Fun.
And the coolest thing happened. We talked. I talked to my 6-year-old. I talked to my 8-year-old as we're like literally looking down, all three of us, because this thing was like this big, so we all had some space to color. And I was like, "What are you guys most excited about for school to start? It starts here in just a couple of weeks." And then they just open it right up. And my 6-year-old, he's playing soccer. I was like, "What do you like most about soccer right now?" And he's like, "Oh, I just love running." Like, just things like that. And then
You're like, I love it when you run too, because it wears you out.
right, exactly. I love like come home tired. But the cool thing about that is we got to talk, and we were talking as we shared in an activity, which I honestly believe increased the environment of psychological safety for them, or it just was more relaxed. It was more laid back. And I was like, and I sat there and I had this epiphany of like, God bless, man. Like I take these kids to the movies, which by the way is a gazillion dollars these days, and we don't really interact. And here we are just doing something creative, and they're not on iPads, they're not on screens, and we're just having a freaking blast. And it's like those simplest things that we can just engage in.
Oh, that's great, man. That's absolutely true. And it's, that wasn't a moment you planned, but now it's one you'll
No.
always remember.
Yeah, yeah, it is fun, man. Well, I wanna get to your book, which by the way, I share with the listeners the title.
Empty Nest, Full Pockets
Pockets,
is
empty
the,
nest, full
the
pocket.
title. It's our company does a lot of orange, so it's got an orange cover by design.
I saw that on your website. I love the cover by the way, but the reason I wanted you to share the title was because empty nest, full pockets. Uh, Depending on the filter that you're reading that title through, you're like, huh, what does that mean? Does that mean we're empty nesters and we were really good with our money? Does that mean we have more time? What does it really mean? So where did the title really come from?
Well, it comes from kind of the subtitle, which is emotionally and financially surviving that transition from, a lot of readers will have high school parents or high school kids, excuse me, a little bit younger. Some might have just launched a kid to college, but they're in that transition of recognizing they're moving from a full nest to an empty one, and it's finding balance in we talk a lot about college and paying for that in a wise manner that doesn't sacrifice your future. And it's really designed to talk about the dual path of getting your kid ready to launch and yourself ready to become an empty nester, because many of us just focus on the first, which is getting the kid ready, and that's good work. But there's a lot of change coming in your life once these kids begin to move on. And if you're not ready for it, it can really hit you in negative fashions, can create some negative patterns. It can exacerbate some things that have been festering for a while. And you can give so much on the kid side, you've lost your identity as to who you're going to be now in the world. And so it's trying to get that, like I said, that dual path framework a little bit built. And that's kind of where we thought it was a little bit unique.
Interesting. So let's talk about things people are doing right now that maybe they shouldn't be doing, or things that people are doing that maybe they should be doubling down on right now. But what should be on the mind and the heart of parents, married couples, as they're raising these kids into these, I would say, let's just say 10 years plus, right? 10 years
Okay.
plus. I mean, granted, from a financial perspective, we need to prepare long before that, but just in those age ranges.
Well, as they're beginning to age and they're going to start to develop these independent skills. You mentioned Todd's quote of when they're 12 on, they're not going to have nearly as much time. And so what I want to encourage dads is that when your kids start to pull away and they become more independent, it means you've done a good job. And so it's not that they're doing this because they don't like you or that there's some sort of rebellious. I'm sure you'll face some of that. We all do. But that they're feeling independent, that they can move on in the world and develop their own relationships because you've helped them build the confidence to do that. And so when my kids were going through these preteen years into their teenage, I had a really, really hard time with it. I talk about it in the book, just felt abandoned and felt like they were just little brats that didn't appreciate all that I'd done, and just was being pretty selfish, frankly, about it all. And I have a counselor friend that I've seen for years, and I explained all this to him, and he was the one who told me, Matt, the only reason they can do that is because you've done a good job as a father. And so cue up the waterworks, when he told me that, because he hit me straight in the heart. That's what was going on. And so, so just being ready for that, being ready for this change of them becoming more independent, doesn't need to frighten or doesn't need to cause a lot of pushback. It's natural. I would say that there are a lot of mindsets that we all have that we've brought on from our parents that we are then passing down on our kids. I filter it around the financial money mindsets is what we call it in the book. But there are a lot of things that you're passing on to them that you might want to start thinking about and filtering because maybe that isn't the right path for them. So let's say you were raised by very, very frugal parents and you're hanging on to every dime because that's just your nature. That's the way that you were raised. You believe that money needs to be saved. There'll never be enough. And I'm not faulting you for it. It's just that's kind of how you feel. And so it's good to step back and say, now, how am I delivering that message to my children? And is that a message that I want to modify in any way? And do I want them to see the world through a different lens of maybe some more abundance, where if you have a part-time job and you're saving, go buy something with it. You've worked hard for that money. Maybe it's time for them to buy their own bike or something that they can be proud of. So bring them along in that journey, but being self-reflective enough to say, I might not be sending the right message here. I was raised by a super entrepreneurial father. He moved us around all the time, started businesses. And then my mother was a nurse and super conservative. And so those two mindsets affect me to this day and the way that I give advice to my clients. And so I have to be aware of that. And I think having that awareness in these preteen years and when they're growing, and it's going to help you and it's going to help them.
What were some things that you did as you reflect on, at an early age, that your kids became independent, right? And your counselor said that's a sign you did a good job. What were some things that you identified that you did that made them that way or that encouraged them to be that way?
I always encouraged them in activities, even if they didn't want to do them. And so tennis, swimming, all the things that, we've talked about that I enjoyed, I asked them to try and to develop some confidence in those areas. In almost every case, they didn't see that through their full high school years, but it showed up somewhere else. Like they would take on a different activity that meant more to them. Video games, for all the pros and cons, they developed big networks and friendships through some of those gaming things. My daughter was incredibly social, and so got involved in all different kinds of committees and things at school that fostered that in there. So encouraging them to do things that they don't always want to do because they don't really know yet what they're going to like. And so trying things and giving them a shot. And, you talked about soccer. Soccer drove me crazy. Everybody did it, but we had the kids give it a shot because that's, we felt like that was going to be maybe a valuable experience for them. So definitely in that area, I did encourage them to have part-time jobs when they could and or work for allowance so that they could actually understand how money begins to flow, how taxes work, how hard work pays off. And so we would do regular jobs around the house. We would do allowance had to be earned. It wasn't just something that was gifted. And then we helped them get part-time jobs around town as they got old enough to be able to do that.
That's really cool, man. What were some chores that they earned money from under your roof?
So for the boys, it was the snow and the grass and all the physical things. The girls preferred to do. We had them do artwork around the house and gift them some funds for that to say, hey, let's make a picture for this room. Or I was in a big U2 phase, and I said, can you guys make me up a U2 poster? And so that kind of thing. Of course, the regular cleaning and helping out with the dishes and the stuff that we're all doing every day as part of being a family. We would, and so we would track it, and we would give incentive. We did like an incentive point. My son that's about to become a CPA, my stepson, he wanted a spreadsheet for all this. So he, wanted it all built up. If I do this, I get this. And so I managed it with each kid a little bit differently because they're all have different incentives.
Isn't that funny? I mean, I have four as well, and they're all wired totally different as far as like what they're motivated by, what they can do, and that kind of thing.
You wait till you see them start to deal with money. You'll be amazed at how different they all approach it. It's amazing to me. The four of them are completely different.
Well, it's interesting you say that because so I meet with my financial advisor 4 times a year. We do a quarterly review. Well, for the past 3 years, my two oldest ones and my 8-year-old will have it here real soon as well. They have custodial accounts and they save money and they put it in those accounts and they're in the market and those types of things. And they come with me to those meetings. And I always tell them, I'm like, hey guys, we're going to go see Austin next week. Make sure you guys have a list of questions that you want answered and all this. And I got to tell you, it's incredible. Like watching these boys ask my financial advisor questions I didn't prep them for. Like, like the last one we did, my 14-year-old, he was like, my account lost $700 because he doesn't have a ton of money in there, but a little bit. And he's like, why did my account lose that money and will I get it back? Right. And then he was just like started talking about stocks and why it went down and things he was invested in. He's like, okay, well, do I sell that then? And then he's like, well, the only time you really lose money is if you sell it. He's like, so we're going to hold it. I would encourage you to hold on to it. He's like, however, there's some other things over here. They're kind of on sale, and he's like, well, what does that mean on sale? And then he was like, well, you know how you go into Dick's Sporting Goods or Target and they, it's 30% off and that kind of thing. He's like, it's kind of like what this stock is doing right now. He's like, it's kind of like 30% off. And you just saw like these wheels just turn. And then he was like, when you pay a house payment, what does interest rates mean? Just things like that. I was like looking at him like, holy crap, this wasn't even on my radar when I was your age. Like, it was pretty cool.
That's great, man. That's a great advice. I've always encouraged parents to bring their kids and need to do it more, especially when you get into the college planning side, so they can actually understand how that works, who's going to pay what. Then you are really moving from just a parent to more of a partner in the process.
That's one of the things I wanted to talk about: becoming a partner rather than a boss, like strategies to prepare your kids for their new lives in college, beyond, and empowering them to make their own decisions. So I think it's safe to say that most parents, they just want to bum rush in and start barking orders and give directions. And that's not just with college. That's with every part of their life. But one of the best, and I am so guilty of that in some realms. And there are some realms where I'm like, no. I need to take a step back and just allow them to make a decision. And I also need to allow them to fall flat on their face if that's what's going to happen. But what does that mean to become a partner rather than a boss?
As you're moving into that phase, especially in college, they're going to have ideas about where they want to go. And it's not just college, it's maybe majors or classes they want to take in high school, areas where that they want to pursue that will make no sense to you whatsoever. And
Right.
so you can't just come in swinging and say, that makes no sense whatsoever.
That's
Because
dumb.
all you're going to get is this, 100%. Oh, I forget it then. I won't even talk to you about it. Kind
Right.
of a so being a partner you have to allow them to have room for those ideas to breathe. And I'm not saying that you have to agree with them or encourage them, but as they're making these bigger decisions about like where they want to go to school, and like I said, some of the classes they might want to take or whatever it may be, you want to come alongside them and encourage them for that's great. It's great that you have that idea that you want to move forward. And are you hearing me okay?
Perfectly fine.
And so you really want to step in there as you're walking alongside them instead of just kind of pushing them in the direction that you want them to go. So my son wanted to go to the University of Iowa because he is a Hawkeye fan. That's it. The only reason. And so I I the mistake I made was not to be more engaged with them in that process and talk it through a little bit more as to all the ramifications of if this is really the best place for you and how that's going to work. And so I feel like the mistake that I made was being too hands off to say, all right, they're old enough now, they should be able to do this all on their own. Well, they don't know. There's so much they don't know. There's so much I didn't as a financial advisor know about picking a school and advising them as to where they might fit and where they might not, how the money works, that college is completely a buyer's market, that you can find a great school at a price way off list price. So many things about it that I learned, that you being a partner in it so that you stay engaged, just don't direct it. Just don't say, this is where you're going to go. It's better to set, say, like parameters. If you want to go to a school, mom and dad will cover whatever in-state tuition is. And if you want to go somewhere else, you'll have to borrow and or figure out a way to pay for the other part. And this is how that would work. And this is how much you would pay when you were done with school. And so you're working with them. They have a guideline, but not a rule. You know what I'm saying? So they have a feel for where they can begin to stretch their elbows a little bit and say, this is really what I really want to do. And then, if you're helping pay for that, you can make them justify that a little bit and be part of that in a way that isn't dictatorial, but you are, a partner with them.
I love that. So you're talking about very clear communication. This is my role. This is your role. Here's my job. Here's your job. And then I love also the discussing strategies beyond that. If you're good with it, and I don't want to pry too much into your personal life, but I would love for you to just illustrate the agreement that you had with your kids as far as like, okay, you're going to college. This is what I'm going to cover. This is what you're going to cover. And we'll discuss ways of how you'll cover that. Would you mind sharing that?
Sure. So we had four. And they were all going to school. There was at one point where all of them were in school at the same time.
Oh my God.
So,
you guys live
I laid out kind of what we'd saved and done what we could. And so we agreed that we would cover in-state tuition at a public university, for the state of Iowa, where we're from. If they wanted to do anything else, they would need to cover it. And so we began doing the college.
Just real quick for clarification. So in-state tuition, like, okay, we all know in-state tuition is going to be less, but like, let's just say they were like, hey, I want to go to Ohio State. Did you make the agreement of like, okay, well, Iowa State is 10 grand per year. So if you want to go to Ohio State, I'll pay the 10 grand, but you're in charge of everything else? Or was that discussion not even had?
Exactly. That's exactly what we said.
Okay, cool.
So, all four of them didn't really have a real clear view of what they wanted to do. So some kids have a real specific, I want to go into journalism. The University of Missouri is going to be a great fit. Others are, I want to be a doctor. So I'm going to go find a school that's a research university to give me pre-med. But many kids are like, well, I want to go try out a few things, which I think is great. So you want a place where they can get well-rounded. But financially, yes, we said we would cover in-state for 4 years. So if they went too long, if they transferred, whatever, that would be on them. Or if they wanted to go to a private school that was quite a bit more expensive. But what I learned and what I really want to share with your listeners is that these private schools are incredibly generous, can be incredibly generous, to where you can pay virtually the same as in-state tuition for many families just by asking and just by following the process through a little bit and doing a little bit more legwork. And some of these schools are a much, much better fit for undergraduates than these big research universities where undergraduate education is not their primary focus. But a small school, or even, it depends on what your kid's been used to in high school and all that. But if they want even just a middle-sized university or liberal arts college, you'd be amazed at, you can say, University of Iowa is offering me this. Will you match it? And if they want your kid, they'll match it in spades in many cases. And this was something I didn't know until I got into the process and learned more about it.
Good to know. Good to know. Okay. So what about like living expenses and that kind of thing? Were they 100% responsible for that?
So that was a partnership. So we would pay for some things. So I'd say like groceries and things I paid for until I saw beer or White Claws or 14 bags of Cheetos.
Yeah.
I knew when they were buying for their buddies.
Yeah.
So I definitely had to monitor that. But we had a set agreement, and then I didn't want any of them to work when they were freshmen, just to get used to the process.
Okay.
But then we'd encourage them all to work on campus or somewhere around there. And then especially in the summers, they end up a lot of times staying at their university and working through the summers. So I worked out based on what they were making, and if I felt like they were chipping in enough, we'd cover part of it. But like I said, I had to keep my eyes on the occasional White Claw abuse.
There's drinking at college?
No, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Once again, if they pick the school for the sport team or because it's a party college, you should be very concerned.
Yeah.
Those aren't probably the best two reasons.
Oh man. Very cool. So, and I know one of the topics we were going to discuss was like the tuition dilemma, creative ways to pay for college tuition without sacrificing a retirement fund and that kind of thing. I'm guessing this goes well beyond, negotiating like, hey, Ohio State or Iowa State offered me this. Can you match it? What are some other creative ways that we can start saving for college, paying for college?
So, of course, 529 plans are available in almost every state, and many of them will give you state tax deductions and or credits based on your state's thing. You can also save in those then tax-free. I find a lot of parents are reticent to use 529 plans because they're concerned if the kid doesn't go to school. But I'd encourage you to do some research because there's lots of ways, and they're getting even more flexible as they mature, these plans. So they can be a great vehicle. You can use them with other kids if one kid doesn't use it all. We used a waterfall approach where my son didn't use all his, so I waterfall it to the next kid and on down the road till we got everybody through. So there's lots of flexibility. So spend some time understanding how those work and check out your own states because they can be a great vehicle for doing this that offer a lot more flexibility, and all the growth in those is generally tax-free. I'd also spend a little bit of time understanding how student loans work because there are federal student loans that have much more favorable terms to private student loans. So you can borrow up to $27,000 via these loans over a 4-year education, and they can be a lot more manageable for your kid out of school than the other private loans that have high rates. So I really encourage parents to go through a pre-approval process like you do for a mortgage that just says, based on what our income is and based on what we need to be saving for our retirement, this is what we can afford for college. And you share that with your student. It says, this is what mom and dad can do. And here's the numbers behind that. That process will give you a lot more peace that you're within your framework and guidelines. And it will also help your kids shop for a school based on, the number is 15,000 a year. Get to work on finding what you think will work. If you want it to be more than that, we'll talk through student loans and whatever. But once again, you're going back to building some framework. But it's a newer mechanism called this pre-approval process. It's very much like if you're going to buy a house for $300,000, you have to go to the bank and get pre-approved to say that you can afford that. Same thing should go for college because in many cases you can spend up to that amount, if you can believe it or not. Especially Larry, you have four, so you know, you got more debits than credits coming in that direction, I'm afraid.
Yeah, man, I'm very nervous about that, to be honest. I mean, we've been saving for the boys for quite some time. You know, our plan is that what we have in savings for them in their 529s will pay 50%, but then they're in charge of the other remaining 50%. But I
Mm-hmm.
love how granular you get with your description of like, I will pay this and you pay that. And here are our roles moving forward. And here's what I will pay for. Here's what I won't pay for. White Claws not included,
Mm-hmm.
along with 13 bags of Cheetos. Uh, from a marriage standpoint, you know, let's think about this, and I want to view this through the lens of, you know, the listeners who still have kids at home. Their kids are not going to go to college for maybe 5, 10, maybe even 15 years, right? But this second honeymoon is coming, right? I always tell my wife, I love my wife to death, and we have a lot of date nights. You know, we really try to date each other very intentionally. Like we carve out time to not be mom and dad, but to be a married couple, and we're adamant about that. And at the same time, when the kids start moving out, it's going to change the dynamics of how we operate as a family. And I also know that there's going to be an emotional impact when our kids leave. So let's just talk about the men right now who are listening to the podcast who have kids who are 5, 10, 15 years old. Second honeymoon's coming in that within that range. What are some things that we could do right now to elevate the relationship that we have with our wives that maybe men aren't even thinking about? And the reason I ask this question is because we're so focused. My wife and I used to be like this. We're so focused on being parents that we use, number one, our individuality. We also lose, like, holy crap, like the kids are out of the house. I've been married to this woman for 20 years and I'm not sure I know who she really is anymore. And maybe she feels the same way about us. So, what are some things we can do in the meantime to make sure that we're cultivating that relationship at all times?
Yeah, well, you nailed it. The things that you're doing, as far as date nights, et cetera. What can really happen is inertia in these years because you're parenting and you're full time. All of a sudden, the person that you're sleeping with, you don't even really know anymore, and you can drift. And I've seen it way too many times. Close friends, clients, et cetera. That the kids leave and there's nothing left. And so if you don't feed it, if you don't spend time and take trips and do things just the two of you, or even just with close friends, away from the kids, you can just lose touch. And it doesn't happen in a day, it happens over years. And then resentment can build, and just the challenges of that first Friday when their kids are gone and you look at each other. If there's not love there and respect there and the desire to be together, it's as you can imagine, a really difficult thing. And so, um, your suggestion of date nights is a great one. I really believe in taking trips and spending some time alone away from the kids is also something that you should do. And in the trips that you're planning, it's stuff that both of you like to do. It's not all based on one person's wishes. You share some of those ideas. Engaging with each other's families, feeling a part of that community, I think is really important so that you're all in this together. And then as they do get into those teenage years and you're beginning to see that independent streak and less time, start talking about the things that you want to start doing. We call it an empty nester green ledger in the book, but just building out a few things of once they're gone, let's do this. And once this happens, and I'm just going to tell all of your listeners, no matter where they're at in the game, this can be one of the funnest periods in your life after your kids leave. So the shock of it is over. They're off on college. We talk about the first Friday. And I can't tell you how it feels not to have to worry about your kid on a Friday night when they're in high school. When you know they're at college, they're not coming home. They're going to be fine. You've done the work. That can bring a lot of hope and space into your relationship that if it's healthy going into it, will only get stronger. I feel so much closer to my wife than I did 5 years ago because it's she and I, and we've developed this huge circle of friends that we do stuff with. And we have a fun jar that we put ideas into with our group. And then we'll pull one and we'll all go to Kansas City or whatever the case may be. So I give you all a lot of hope that this can be a great journey, very, very rewarding. You see your kids launch, you see them living in the world, you've done the work, and now you get to savor it for a while as an empty nester. And so know that that's coming and know that your spouse is who you want to spend that time with. That'll help you do the work.
I love the idea of the fun jar, you know,
Yeah.
and you just, to be honest, man, you made me feel, you made me feel a lot better just talking about this because,
Good.
I like to, this sounds ridiculous, but I like to pride myself on, I don't cry very often. I'm pretty resilient, but the one thing that will bring me to my emotional knees is my kids, and moments I have with them or things that they say. And I'm just like, oh man, that just like hit me big time in the heart. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I tell I actually got misty eyed talking to my 16-year-old about this because I was like, dude, you're like 2 years from, he's actually 18 months from being 18. And I'm just like, I was talking to him about it, like as we were sitting over a fire pit a couple weeks ago. And I'm like, the day you move out of this house, man, is going to be a very, very emotional, dark day for me. And he's like, and I kind of got teary eyed. He's like, you getting teary eyed? I'm like, yeah, man, just thinking about it, like coming home and you're not here, like it's gonna hit me hard.
Mm.
And, but I also love that idea. Like when I started thinking about like the fun jar with Jessica, like the things we're gonna do, like this type of thing and this type of thing, and that all feels really really good. But and the cool thing too is like be mindful of those things right now.
Mm.
That you can put some of these things on your radar, which I think is cool. Um, well, as we come to the end here, Matt, what I want to do here is I just want to give you an opportunity because what have we not talked about that guys need to hear?
I just think as dads, we're expected to play a role in our kids' life that's a little bit more of the disciplinarian and just these expectations around masculinity. And I think all that's really important. I think that if a kid doesn't have any discipline in his life, just because you haven't provided it, you've done them a disservice. But I think allowing your kids to see, Larry, for your son to see you get emotional like that, that's going to make them know how much you care. And my kids are used to me crying. They're used to seeing me get emotional. When all four of them went to school, I bawled and I did it right in front of them and I stalled. I wouldn't let them leave. It was pathetic, but it was genuine and they knew they were loved. And so I just believe that we have a lot of emotional reservoir we're not encouraged to tap into. And I thank my father for this because he was always able to cry and able to share his emotion with me. That I'm able to do that with my kids. And so you're going to go through some tough years. If your kids are 5 or 10 and teenage years are coming, I call it independence, but you're probably going to call some of it rebellion because they're going to start throwing their elbows and want to do things their way. And you're not going to like a lot of the choices that they make, but hanging in there with them and showing them that you care. My daughter turned 24 yesterday and I spoke to her on the phone and, it never goes away, guys. That love and that care for them and that partnership of being a parent, it only gets better as they become adults because they develop respect for what you've done and they see how much you poured into their lives. And it's incredibly rewarding. And I'm starting to choke up again, so I'm just going to say that's it.
Well, I know I said I had one more question for you, but I do have one more if you're cool with it.
Absolutely.
I'd like to put you in a situation, and this might hit you in the heart pretty good, but I think it'd be really meaningful. How old are you, Matt?
I'll be 55 in a couple weeks.
55. Okay. So I want to put you in a situation where you're 70. Okay. 15 years from now.
Mm.
Your son is 40, daughter's 39. Your twins are 38. You and your wife have been married now for 30 years, not 15. You're sitting around a table and you're at the head of the table. Your wife is to your right.
Mm.
Your kids are spread throughout the table, and maybe there are grandkids. There probably are. There's marriages, there's spouses, that kind of thing. But I want you to imagine for a moment a dinner, and you hold your wife's hand, and you look at her and you smile, and everybody's quiet for a moment, and you ask everybody, you're like, "Hey, I have a question for everyone." As you look over the past 15 years, what have been the most meaningful ways that we've connected, the most meaningful memories that we've made over the past 15 years? And what are they telling you that haven't happened yet?
Um, I think it'll be, we've always done this special trip as a whole family to South Carolina. And I really see us doing that all again, especially with grandkids, as that comes. So I think times when you can actually put the whole tribe in one space, which is really difficult to do when you have four,
Yeah.
and they're all over the country. I do think it'll center around that, but I think they'll just know that they were loved and respected for who they were, which I grew up in a really strict religious world where you never felt worthy. And I've worked really, really hard for my kids and my family to feel worthy of who they are as individuals. And so I think however we allow them to express that will be, and that includes our grandkids, will be what matters. That we weren't expected to be something that we weren't, and we weren't expected to perform to be part of this family. We were accepted for who we were and loved for it.
Love that, man. And yeah, making memories and traveling. Charleston, is that where you go by chance?
Pawleys Island, it's called. It's just south of Myrtle Beach by an hour. It's
Okay.
a little peninsula, but they have these beautiful old houses, and it's great for like 20 people. You can just
Awesome.
explode the place. Yeah.
Super cool, man. Congratulations on your book.
Thanks,
And,
man.
and thank you so much for your message today. For me and for the other listeners, this type of advice is gold because none of us, the the best teachers that we have, I think, in life are the people who are just a little bit ahead of us, right? Whether it's 5 or 10 years, 15 years, just a little bit ahead of us in experience. And when those people like yourself can give us a glimpse of like, hey, here's what's to come, and here's what to be ready for, because success, it leaves breadcrumbs, mistakes leaves breadcrumbs, and experience does the same. So I really appreciate you sharing in your journey. And I know some of the questions I asked, got you a little bit emotional, but I think that just proves what a heartfelt human being you are, and why this topic and your kids and family is so important to you. So I appreciate your authenticity. I appreciate you sharing your views with us. And I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity here for the men who want to come find you and connect with you or buy your book or whatever that is. What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so you can find us at prairiefirewealth.com or pfwplanning.com is our website. The book information is included on the site there. And so you can always sign up for our email list, which includes lots of guest work, blogs. We try to put out content around these subjects as much as we possibly can. So yeah, anybody that wants to reach out in that vein, we'd love to have you. And Larry, I thank you for having me today and for these really thoughtful questions.
Oh, my pleasure, my man. I really enjoyed it. This was really fantastic. And you think you're coming on a podcast to talk about college, savings, preparation, empty nest, but there's so much more
Mm-hmm.
that we covered, and I'm glad that we did.
Yeah, me too.
Gentlemen, head on over to the dadedge.com/389 for this show. Again, the dadedge.com/389. Matt, thank you so much for coming on, man. This was gold. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you as well.
back at you. Gentlemen, go out and live legendary. Take care.